So before I start this, I want to say that I'll be skipping some of the questions for time's sake.
Hey statists, we've got some questions for you.
I just love the fact that anarchists and libertarians go out their way to call the outgroup statists.
Aw, are we hurting your feelings? You've been reading some third-wave feminist literature about how words matter?
Outside of those circles, I never really see people refer to each other as statists.
You mean kind of like the term regressive leftist, authoritarian, and SJW? The term statist refers to a person that takes the position of defending the state. If that is you, you're a statist. If it's not, then you're not one. The reason this video is to statists is because the questions revolve around the justification of state functions. Jesus, sorry if they triggered you.
If libertarians are in favor of smaller government, does that mean that they're statists too?
Yes.
And if libertarians by definition are statists, does that mean that you acknowledge that there are different people with different belief systems about the government?
Yes, there are people with different beliefs about the government. Was that really a question that needed to be asked?
If a kid couldn't afford lunch because the school bullies kept taking a percentage of his allowance, you wouldn't blame the kid's parents for not giving him enough. So why is it that when people struggle financially, you blame the employer who provides them with money and not the government which is taxing them?
That is a false equivalence. The purpose of parents giving kids lunch money is for them to buy lunch. The same thing applies with employees.
Okay, so you pointed out how they're similar, now what's the difference?
The purpose of employees, besides maintaining their business, is to pay their workers. When you open up a business, that taxation is pretty much expected, whereas that bullied that kid is in fact unexpected. Taxation can in fact be a factor on why the employee fired that person. However, there are other cases in which the employee fired that person for no good reason.
So you just went off and tried to show a false equivalency and you failed at that. You yourself just said that in both cases the recipient of money was meant for them to buy a good or service, and the only difference was whether that force was expected or not. So if the bully tells you at the beginning of the year to expect part of your lunch money to be taken, then it suddenly absolves him? You're trying to find some arbitrary difference to somehow save your precious concept of taxation.
For fans of democracy, I would ask, is it okay to forcibly rob, control, or otherwise victimize somebody as long as the majority approves of it?
Of course not.
Great, I'm glad you can agree on this. So you're an ANCAP then. Okay, video over. That was easy. But seriously, in the previous question, you just advocated for taxation, which is theft, something that you only allow when it's the majority deciding on it. Your answer here is completely contradictory to your position. Think about it. I steal from you, that's wrong, correct? But if there's a collective that wants to steal from you, that's fine?
How come you want to ban things that you don't like? As long as they're not hurting other people, what's the big deal?
I personally don't want to ban things. This question is a failure because it assumes that all statists want to ban things. Yes, some do in fact want to ban things, however I don't want to ban things. The only thing that's worth banning is basically child porn.
So the question is a failure because it doesn't encompass the belief of every statist? Hashtag not all statists. Did that really have to be said? But let me ask you a question if you're not interested in banning things. If I have legitimate property rights to all the money I've earned, would you be in favor of a ban on that right in the form of taxation?
Statists of the left who are always talking about how government's going to help the poor and marginalized groups. I don't understand this. From the ancient world through the Middle Ages all the way up to modern times, governments have largely conspired against the poor. I'm thinking in particular a century ago with eugenics programs and segregation programs and zoning programs, business regulation and union rules. Everything was designed to exclude, marginalize, and impoverish groups that didn't have power.
When you say the government, it sounds as though that you're trying to lump all governments together.
And once again, hashtag not all governments. Actually, no, wait a second. Hashtag all governments. We're talking about the fundamentals of what government is here, which is an institution that systemizes aggression. The types of regulations Jeffrey mentioned have similar effects throughout the world, regardless of what the government is called.
Regarding the United States government, why are you bringing up past events when you can talk about the present events? How exactly is the past still relevant to now?
Okay, stay away from talking about history, guys. That's the past. Why do you have to bring up the darn past? First, Jeffrey probably brought up the past because there's been enough time to see the effects, and that's when the government was initiating many economically harmful programs. But let's look at today for a second. My home state, California. Governor Jerry Brown just passed a law that will add more licensing requirements and regulation compliance in order to reach the state's environmental goals. This will be an extra barrier for existing businesses who have the capital to pay for this, while excluding those who want to start a business and can't afford these regulations. And this doesn't just happen in California. It happens whenever government creates laws that hamper the free market.
Governments are always controlled by rich people. That's just the way it works. Why do you think the government is the right means to help the poor? It makes no sense to me.
It is not, quote-unquote, the right way. However, it's one of many ways. You can have cafeterias, food banks, and charity, all without government help. You can have all those things privatized without any government at all. That being said, we should not rely heavily on the government.
Exactly. Voluntary interaction can create things. I'm glad you agree.
If keeping 100% of someone else's income is slavery, then at what percentage is it no longer slavery?
It's never slavery to begin with. Getting your money taken away from you is not the same thing as a person picking cotton on a cotton field. In the case of employees, the employer does in fact pay the employee, whereas the person who picked cotton for free didn't get a single dime from it.
This is honestly one of your worst answers. Of course, picking cotton isn't like paying taxes, but you're falsely equivocating picking cotton with slavery. Picking cotton isn't inherent to slavery, but what is having your economic freedom taken away. By your logic, picking cotton wouldn't even be slavery because they were paid in the form of food and lodging. Man, you're willing to go that far in your flawed logic just so you can cling to justifying taxation.
Can a bunch of people who don't have the right to do a certain thing grant to somebody else the right to do it?
Of course, by elections.
And if not, how did Congress acquire the right to do things that you and I don't have the right to do?
By voting. If a person promises to do X, Y, and Z, by voting for that person, we allow them to have X, Y, and Z.
And this statement contradicts your other statement at the beginning that a group couldn't gain rights that individuals themselves don't have. Let's look at them side by side.
For fans of democracy, I would ask, is it okay to forcibly rob, control, or otherwise victimize somebody as long as the majority approves of it?
Of course not.
Can a bunch of people who don't have the right to do a certain thing grant to somebody else the right to do it?
Of course, by elections. Of course not. Of course, by elections.
Why are you comfortable spending borrowed money knowing your children will have to pay it off down the line?
I'm not okay with that.
You're increasing their eventual taxes before they can even vote. Isn't that the definition of taxation without representation?
No, it's not. Taxation without representation refers to people who are taxed but not represented.
Exactly, like future generations, unless we're sending that invoice up their future mother's fallopian tubes.
For example, in DC, people are taxed there, but not really represented there in Congress.
So taxation without representation only applies to the now living, because reasons?
If it's wrong for you to do a certain thing, can you, by voting, make it right for someone else to do the exact same thing?
Actually, it's not okay, whether a person's elected or not.
Man, more cognitive dissonance. Please refer to your stance on taxation.
If people are innately good, what is the need for government? And if people are innately evil, what is to stop them using government to cause evil to one another?
You're basically saying that because the government has done bad things, let's get rid of it entirely. Even if we were to abolish the government, people will still form groups and give orders to people. Just because the government is there does not mean that the people themselves are inherently good. The same thing applies to anarcho-capitalists. Without a government, what is preventing you guys from not doing bad things?
I think this answer reveals your misunderstanding of the ANCAP position regarding government. Government is an institution that systemizes aggression. We don't oppose groups that systemize defense. In regards to your question about what's stopping people from doing bad things in an ANCAP society, it would be groups that provide defense services, which won't be government because they won't be funded through taxation or enforce laws that require aggression.
And would it not be better that their influence be limited to that which they can achieve voluntarily, rather than to give them the added benefit of legitimized force?
Why not a mixture of both?
Because systemized aggression is wrong. You don't say, oh look, Tom is hungry. Well, we could have a system where we buy Tom a burger, or we could have a system where we steal a burger for Tom. How about let's do both? That doesn't work.
Here are the things you can't do without government permission. Build a house. Drive a car.
Why shouldn't a person not have a license when they drive? Wouldn't it not make the roads much more safer to drive on?
Not necessarily. A license is not synonymous with a safe driver. But the underlying point of disagreement is that we need to be extorted to fund this. When you think about it, this is a subsidy for insurance companies who have the interest in attaining safe drivers as clients. And this principle applies to some of the other actions you'll mention.
Own a gun. Go fishing.
Because the fish might extinct if they're overfished.
Collect rainwater. Hunt.
Again, because you might extinct the deer.
Cross the road. Get married.
Government should not be involved in marriage. It's a much more privatized issue.
Leave the country. Start a business. Fly on a commercial plane. Take drugs. Work. It's actually hard to think of something that doesn't require government permission. Knowing this, how can you say you're free?
The fact that you're talking and the fact that you're using a computer demonstrates to me that you can do things without the government in your private life. Freedom to me is basically treating people as equals and also to protect their natural rights.
You mean like the natural right to self-ownership? I can own myself and the fruits of my labor, right? Or is it okay for the group to vote to tax me? You seem to want to agree to these principles, yet you still think it's somehow justified to have policies abandoning these principles.
Because our government allows guns and allows free speech and so on, it proves to us that our government is actually much more freer than other countries.
Sure, there's a spectrum of freedom. That doesn't invalidate the injustice of the lack of freedoms that we have.
If you're a proud, government-loving liberal who champions personal choice, could you please explain why I can't choose to not fund the murder of innocent children abroad?
Why not protest and write to your congressman?
So, don't like how we spend your money? Write us a nice letter and we'll get back to you in 4 to 6 weeks. That is, if the post office hasn't misplaced it.
If you've ever said there ought to be a law, or if you believe that government is the best solution to most of life's problems, I have one question for you. Are you prepared to kill? Every law, no matter how big or small it appears to be, is backed by violent force, and in many cases, death.
If a person were to break into my house and actually has a gun on them, I would in fact kill that person out of self-defense.
You missed the point of the question, Tyler. If someone disagrees with the majority's imposition of taxation and they refuse to pay, they will be forced behind bars. If they attempt to defend themselves from this government aggression, they will be killed. Is that okay with you?
Why is it that you prefer anti-discrimination laws which force those who hate other races to hide that prejudice and make money off of those other races, to a system where they could be open about said prejudice and lose money?
Why shouldn't there not be anti-discrimination laws?
He literally just told you that.
Even without anti-discrimination laws, businesses would still lose money without those laws in force.
That was his point.
How is me writing down I'm in charge and then getting 20 friends to sign it any different from the drafting of the Constitution?
One protects our natural rights, the other doesn't.
So if there were laws that didn't protect your natural rights, you wouldn't be for them then, right? Guess what? You just might be an ANCAP because that is literally our position.
Why is every logical explanation we provide about how something will work just pure speculation, while any doomsday scenario you pull out of your ass about anarchism is absolute truth?
For starters, there's no real example of an anarcho-capitalist society. Your belief system runs heavily on speculation.
False. It runs on principle. I thought you would know that by now.
And the only real anarchy was actually in Spain in the 1930s, and that was not anarcho-capitalism, but anarcho-communism.
Anarcho-communism is not anarchy. I've covered this topic in a previous video and I recommend looking it up.
Listen to this ridiculousness. We protect our president with guns, but our children with paper gun-free zone signs.
Do you honestly believe that kids are fully capable of using guns?
He didn't say that. He was pointing out how even adults cannot use a gun to protect their children in those zones.
There could be responsible parents that can protect the kids with guns, as well as police officers too.
Congress has a 9% approval rating. Government can't even balance a budget. We are about to reach a $20 trillion debt. Social Security and Medicare and other socialist policies are unsustainable. The drug war kills more people than drugs itself. How can you say government is effective?
I wouldn't say it's effective. However, the best way to reform a government is to actually have better politicians.
Kind of like the best way to reform a gang is to have better gang members, right? It wouldn't have to do with the system that they're operating under?
To get rid of it entirely is just too radical to me.
Yeah, actually, protecting all natural rights is just way too radical, right?
Democratic nations have successes for thousands of years, whereas anarchy rarely, if not ever, have any success.
A state of anarchy is not some void. It's the rejection of systemized aggression and the promotion of voluntary interaction. Voluntary interaction is all around, and we can see how infringing on natural rights can be harmful. So I'm gonna end the video here, but from your answers, it seems like you agree with the principles of libertarianism, but you just don't apply it consistently. See Taxation. So post your comments down below. I'd like to hear from you. Liberty out, but not gone.